This podcast is supported by National Geographic Documentary Films presenting Sugarcane. A groundbreaking investigation exposes a shocking cover-up of cultural genocide perpetrated by the church and government and illuminates the enduring love and beauty of an indigenous community. Described by the New York Times as a must-see film, stunning. Academy Award nominated for Best Documentary Feature, Sugarcane, now streaming on Disney Plus and Hulu. Hi, everyone. First of all, I'm excited to announce that we are launching our Prestige Junkie Oscar pool this year. Stay tuned for information on how to join that. You can compete against me, Ankler staff, guests from this podcast, your fellow awards fanatics, etc. And then if you're anything like me, when it comes time to fill out that Oscar pool, you're going to find yourself stuck on 3 particular categories, which would be the shorts. So today, I've got my friend, returning guest, the co-host of the This Had Oscar Buzz podcast, Chris Feil, to join me to discuss all 15 of the nominated short films. And then the eternal question of whether actually watching them can help predict what's going to happen. I have a mixed track record there.
As do I.
And then after that, you'll hear my conversation with Monica Barbaro. Her Oscar nomination for A Complete Unknown means that she has a way more unread text than she would like, and you can really imagine. But she's also learning how to hang in there and appreciate the ride as the Oscars approach. I'm Katie Rich. This is the Prestige Junkie podcast. Hello, Chris. Thank you for coming back. I was saying before, you haven't been on since Oscar nominations, I don't think. So,
I don't think so, no.
As far as the listeners are concerned, we have a lot to catch up on, but I do feel like I know most of your Oscar takes at this point because how else can you get through this season?
I won't stop sharing them with you. This is an intervention, really. You're bringing me here to say, Chris, please stop.
Well, you and Joe, because of the way you set up your podcast and Patreon, you guys have been able to talk about the season on your podcast, even though usually it's themes of Oscars past. So you've had kind of a lot of time to hash it out. So before we get into the shorts and the nitty gritty here, for the listeners of this who haven't heard you, how are you feeling about the race? Do you feel like, aside from the devastating, historically terrible, we will shame ourselves in 10 years, Marianne Jean-Baptiste snub, obviously.
I will never get over it.
We'll never forgive,
by
never forget.
nature of my own show, I will be bitching about this for a very long time. Obviously that was the biggest disappointment on nomination day, I think for many of us, myself included. We're at the stage in the race now where things are really solidifying towards tipping into everybody kind of feels maybe a little overconfidence in things to the point where we're like, well, are we a little bored?
No. A week ago we're recording this on the day before this comes out on the 14th. A week ago, we were like, wow, who knows what's going to happen? It's too early for us to be bored. Honora has not been the front runner for long enough.
Well, I've posed this theory that Honora is doing this kind of Birdman thing that, it's been a factor in this race for a long time, had a period where it felt like it wasn't really winning anything, but then proves maybe it was all along going to kind of be the winner, even absent a super obvious narrative in the way that we might have for other movies, or if they might feel like more of a movie of the moment. But this is just the movie that everybody can kind of generally agree upon liking, and that is strength as well.
I love it when you say things like Honora's gonna Birdman. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a perfectly logical sentence that you've just said.
Yeah.
Because I think you're totally
very
right.
Similar movies from 2 very similar filmmakers, right? However, I would say for anybody who's feeling that bit of everything's kind of locked into place, that's a great mindset to have when you jump into the shorts and feel like, oh, maybe there is still some room for surprise here and there, even in the shorts races.
Yes. I feel this often with animation, and this is a pretty good animated feature nominee year. So it's not, Flow is pretty exciting on the level of a lot of these, but I'll watch those movies a lot of years and be like, oh my God, you can do that with animation. It doesn't all have to look vaguely the same. And yeah, that's often the feeling you get with shorts. Where, even some of these movies aren't that successful. There's probably some movies in here that I would put near the bottom of my ranking of all of the Oscar nominees if you asked me to. But yeah, the possibility for excitement, the feeling that you feel like how everything is going to go, which is another reason why every year they try to take the shorts off the broadcast, and every year I'm like, no, if you watch these movies, you deserve to have something someone who's not given a speech all season get to stand up on stage and be celebrated. It's so worthwhile.
And there can be great Oscar memories or even great Oscar cringe moments in acceptance speeches of, the Oscars for the short categories.
Wait, what's the cringe moment I'm forgetting?
I'm remembering, unfortunately, the winners of Skin going and it feeling like suddenly the Oscars became a keg party. They're just like shouting and yelling like it's their favorite sports team.
Look, we loved it when 3-6 Mafia did it. When we love it when the team behind Skin does it?
Well, that was fun.
That was fun.
I also remember Thoth at the Oscars. Does anybody else remember Thoth at the Oscars?
That's like 2002. Like, you're going way back for shorts.
This is what I'm here for.
Just like the guy himself taking the stage.
Yes, Thoth at the actual Oscar ceremonies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think among these shorts there's like a character that if they showed up at the Oscars, I would be delighted in quite the same way.
I might have to disagree.
Ooh, okay, all right.
Just because Instruments of a Beating Heart is maybe like the character, the individual person that we're following, Ayame. Little tiny drummer Ayame.
But she has to show up with her cymbal on stage to really to complete the illusion. Okay, before we
give
dive
her
into
two Oscars and she'll play that drum with both of her Oscars.
Before we dive into the shorts, because this is coming out before the BAFTAs, which are on Sunday. Any BAFTA predictions you want to throw out there?
Ooh. I'm not quite sure if BAFTA is going to be shaking this up, especially because this does feel already kind of like a European race. I've seen some people predict maybe Demi Moore wouldn't win there, but I mean, I think the substance is so broadly liked, even for all of the things we would think are stacked against it. So I don't know. I guess my BAFTA prediction is more of the same.
Yeah, not Conclave. You don't think this is going to be like the Conclave revival because of all the Brits?
I don't, ultimately.
Okay.
I mean, maybe we could see a Best Picture winner that's different. I forget if Honora's even nominated at
It is,
BAFTA.
yeah. Honora's in the mix. Mikey Madison's in the mix. I mean, I do think there have been enough people asking, like, look, if Honora's going to, like, win picture and director and Mikey Madison doesn't win, like, that's weird. And, like, I agree that from a historical perspective, that would look weird, even though I think Demi Moore has every reason to win. But, like, if Mikey Madison won the BAFTA, then people would really start throwing some theories out there.
Yeah. I'll say vote for Michelle Austin for Hard Truths. That's the win that I would love to see.
I realize I have gotten my hopes up about Marianne Jean-Baptiste enough this season to not dash them again. But, like, she is nominated at the BAFTA. That was a terrible snub. If the BAFTAs really wanted to do it right, they could give it to her instead. I don't want to predict it for all the reasons we've just discussed, but God, that would be so good.
Yes.
All right, BAFTA voters, get your act together. Okay.
Pick something fun for Best British Film. Pick something unexpected and fun.
Our friends Kneecap, who got all those BAFTA nominations and then didn't get the International Feature nomination. What a fun movie.
So close to having like 2 Oscar nominations.
Yeah. Don't you want to see those guys take the stage? It'll be like Thoth times 3. Like, let the members of Kneecap be on stage at the BAFTAs.
Thoth and Kneecap drop the collab.
Okay, let's dive into the shorts. They are currently playing in theaters around the country. They're playing near me. They may be playing near you in Ohio, Chris. If you go to shorts.tv/the Oscar Shorts, you can figure out where they're playing, but you can probably also find them on Fandango. I do feel like they're like kind of a stealth box office success. Like, none of these movies are something that would sell tickets on their own, but people tend to really like turning out to see them. And, like, God knows there'll probably be another group of people who take their children to the animated shorts and are horrified by what they find.
There's like no short for children in this lineup. Maybe 1 or 2.
Oh, there's one about a child.
Magic Candies, I think,
Candies is
good
the
for
one.
kids, yeah.
So, yeah, maybe let's start with the animated shorts because that's probably the highest ticket seller. I do think you said possibly your favorite of all of the Oscar nominees, period, is in this group.
Not my favorite of the Oscar nominees. I don't love it more than the Nickel Boys, or just Nickel Boys. Sorry, Gritty Reboot. Wander to Wonder is tremendous to me. I mean, I kind of felt like it's a little bit. Some of these shorts, especially in live action often, and even in animated, they feel like a test reel for an eventual feature. Like, here's the proof of concept. We've made this short. Now give us money to make a feature of this. But that didn't really bother me about Wander to Wonder because I guess it kind of ends in a moment where it feels like something is beginning. It follows basically these three characters who were originally part of a children's program that went under and got canceled, but they are still trapped in the studio where they have been abandoned and sustaining on gherkins and still kind of making their own version of the show that they used to be a part of.
They're tiny people who wear costumes, so you think they're little creatures, but they're actually people. But they're small, and like the creator of the show seems to have died suddenly, and there's no one there to know that they're still there. It's so spooky on so many levels.
And they're aging at the same time too. Like they're aging as if human beings would age too. So there's something about memory, grief, and I guess kind of claiming your own future too, because it ends with them basically breaking out of the studio. And there's just this kind of wild imagination with it. It's kind of like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood on hallucinogenics, if you can imagine that. I loved it so much. It just felt so like a complete realization of this world that it creates for us. Because there is a human performance in it. It's, it's mostly, I'm guessing stop motion, though even some stop motion now. Things that look like stop motion are computer animated in a lot of animated recent works. So I can't speak to the actual animation style of this, but I loved it so much. And then you have the human actor, which I hope doesn't hurt its chances in this category because I loved this so much.
I have no idea what to predict. I mean, we'll talk about the rest of the films, but sometimes I feel like animated is the hardest one to predict. I love it because it feels like such a complete world that it's creating. Like so often, I think like you're saying about proof of concept or like the idea is like, what if this idea was this? And then they kind of like play that out for the 7 or 8 minutes it can go to. And that's the beauty of these shorts is that like they can have a pretty simple idea and they can work with it. But it feels like Wander to Wonder opens up all these doors into potential other worlds. It's like, oh, we might not get there, but like just think about that as you watch this movie. And I think that's that richness you're talking about. Like, I don't know if I like loved it because I was so like unsettled by it. But that's a really strong emotional reaction also. And I think a real like testament to the filmmaking there.
They also have a great Instagram account where they take these three characters and place them in various things. They don't have a ton of posts, but they did have one of the three animated characters watching the nominations, which was great.
I need to watch that.
I'm definitely rooting for them. Though I do actually think that this is a pretty high bar of animated shorts.
Yeah.
I thought that the lineup this year is really good. So should that lose, I wouldn't be too brokenhearted just because I think it would likely lose to something that's very good or admirable.
Yeah, I feel like the likable one that might, for people who actually watch it, which you never know how many people are watching these, is Yuck, the French movie. What's the French word for yuck? That's the actual title. It's like, bleh. I can't remember what the word is. But it's like, it's set in this like campsite with this like group of kids who are kind of running around being crazy, and they watch adults kiss and think about how gross it is. And in this world, people's lips turn pink when they want to kiss each other, which is...
And glittery.
And they look like drag queens. It's so lovely. And then two of the kids start looking at each other and their lips turn pink and they realize they want to kiss each other and they're freaked out by it and their friends think it's gross. It's so cute. It kind of reminded me like of a Bluey episode in a weird way where it's like simple and the animation is a little bit there, but it's kind of got big feelings rolling underneath the surface. It doesn't look that much like Bluey. But I just loved the little world. And it was, again, like a perfect little concept played out for exactly as long as it can go. And then you get out of there.
Yeah, and it has a nice comedic tone, too. I mean, I watched them alphabetically, so it was the last one that I watched.
Right after Wander to Wonder, probably.
Yeah. It just felt like a nice capper, too. I don't know what order they play in theatrically.
Yeah.
I don't know. There is something about the animation style that this was so upbeat and fun and ultimately really lovely and kind of maybe not everyone would be comfortable putting their kids in front of this animated short about kissing, but it is ultimately this like sex positive thing that is like, you know, natural to kids who think that it's disgusting, but as you age, you're going to have curiosities, and it does that in a non-creepy way. It's very sweet.
Yeah.
I wonder if the animation style could be a hindrance here, but I do think it has some strength just because of the tone of it.
Well, what of what we haven't discussed has an animation style that you think could work in its favor? Is it like kind of stands out above the other one?
In the Shadow of the Cypress is kind of a traditional animation style. It's ultimately a kind of allegory for PTSD. There's this, I think we're led to believe, father-daughter, and it's set in Iran. There is a literal beached whale that this daughter is trying to get back out to sea while the father is helping and getting all of these traumatic memories. And of course, the whale becomes this visual metaphor for, you know, what he's going through. And
between that and Flow, big year for whales. Yes.
big year for animals in general. It has kind of this emotional underpinning and this clear vision to it that makes it easy to imagine voters supporting this one. And I think it's very emotionally effective and tells a full story.
Yeah.
It's weird to say that a short is maybe too long, but this one maybe goes on longer.
It's a little long, and it's a little oblique. Like it's all, you know, it's dialogue free, so you're kind of like trying to assume what they're feeling. And I feel like most years there's like one or two shorts that do that, where you kind of have to put the pieces together yourself. But I kind of got to the end of it, I was like, okay, like this is more metaphor than it is actually story. But it is really beautifully done. And when you're talking about it being traditional, like it's still a really elegant use of traditional animation, and I do think that could be powerful.
And it maybe also stands out from the pack because all the other four are a little left of center, or maybe there's comedic elements enough to the other one, and this one is very serious. So, you know, that doesn't hurt a short, you know, standing out from the pack.
Yeah. No, and I really liked, like, Magic Candies is the other one that's kind of got like a kid story at the center of it. I think you could, it's like kind of weird. I like the way that it's weird. It's got like a couch that talks and like a dog reflecting on his mortality. And, you know, one of the most beautiful shots in it is like a bunch of leaves talking as they fall off of a tree. But I thought it was creative in a lot of the ways that it does that, and kind of it runs its concept exactly the way that it should. Is it like, it's like not as straightforward as Yuck, but is it like too straight? I don't know. Like, I don't know. Trying to think about how voters think about these again is such a sucker's game because you're never going to get there. But I liked it fine. It like feels like maybe sitting in the middle for me, I guess.
Yeah, it's maybe a little repetitive because it's a child, you know, basically dealing with his isolation through these magic candies that make him interact with the world. And it made me kind of think, like, is this child taking edibles? What's happening? He ends up like talking to his anthropomorphized bubblegum. But yeah, I do think just kind of the natural structure of it, it does feel ultimately like it's repeating itself. But I did have a good time with it.
What did you make of the beautiful men? The Bo and Yang, any nominations announcement pondered. Where are the beautiful men?
It's somewhat maybe ironically titled. It's about three brothers who are going through male baldness, and they're going to get hair surgery together. This is yet another, along with Wander to Wonder, animated Oscar short with full frontal animated nudity. And
you
quite
thought
a bit
my
of it.
year of dicks was the limit of it, but the dicks continue in the animated shorts category.
Again, it's a stop motion aesthetic, but this feels like, I don't know, not quite Alexander Payne-y, but, you know, it's a certain middle-aged male, not body humor, but like melancholy and sadness related to, you know, male midlife crises.
Yeah, they're so pitiful. Like what a bunch of sad sack dudes here in this hotel in Istanbul.
Your mileage may vary most with this one. I liked it fine. I don't necessarily see it as a winner unless it appeals to people who
the middle-aged
feel
male
like there's
voter block of the
familiarity.
Academy.
Yeah.
I mean, looking back at the last couple of years of winners, like, it really is the most like bluntly emotional animated movies. Like, you know, I've watched all these shorts for a long time, and all the ones that stick out in my head, I'm like, oh yeah, that one lost to The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, the Apple like pretty animated one, or the John and Yoko one last year, where it's all about finding connection across the battlefield. So like, but I don't like none of these are really the one that's like, here's how you should treat people, which is like so often where these shorts winners come from. So I don't know how you like pick one out of that theme.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it's following a trend. And I think another thing about the lineup of shorts overall is it feels like there's less. I mean, some of them are distributed by Netflix, but it feels like there's less. This is also the time of year when we hear like, oh, this short has a really robust campaign behind it. And, this one's really getting out there. Or, it's backed by a streamer with money, or sometimes even Searchlight releases them. And we have less of that this year.
Yep. I don't think there's any hidden big names in any of these.
Yeah, not in animated,
not
at
in
least.
Animation. There's a couple. We'll get to a couple of them.
Yeah, I guess it just comes down to clarity of concept and what gets its message across the most, that most people will get something from it. And I do wonder if that's in the shadow of the cypress.
Oh, man. I was going to say Yuck. I feel like if,
Yuck is just so fun.
The most accessible one. Although I was thinking about, was like, I think you've watched all the shorts too. In 2021, the winner was this, like, they were all really odd. This is the one where it was an animated film about like a female torturer in like Pinochet's Chile. Do you remember that? Yeah, it's like the weird animated shorts. And it was like kind of a coin toss of what won. So I wonder if this is going to be a year like that.
Yeah.
This podcast is supported by National Geographic Documentary Films presenting Sugarcane. A groundbreaking investigation exposes a shocking cover-up of cultural genocide perpetrated by the church and government, and illuminates the enduring love and beauty of an indigenous community. Described by the New York Times as a must-see film, stunning. Academy Award nominated for Best Documentary Feature, Sugarcane, now streaming on Disney Plus and Hulu. Okay, let's do documentary next, just because we talked about Instruments of a Beating Heart up at the top. Good documentaries. Like, I thought all of these were good. And like, I think doc short tends to be the strongest of the shorts categories. Usually we'll talk about live action where the ratio can be a lot tougher. But like this group of 5 is maybe one of the strongest groups I can remember.
Yeah. Sometimes I tend to feel in the doc lineup that there can be just a real clunker. And I didn't find one in this doc lineup. There's some that have been available through The New Yorker. Netflix does have one here as well. As far as like personal favorite, I found Incident to be the most impressive.
Yeah.
It takes police body cam footage and live camera action from a police shooting that happened in Chicago, from a man who was killed by police while having all of this proper documentation for his concealed carry. And it edits it all in a way that really gives you this immersive perspective on this very chaotic moment that happened in time in Chicago. And we see, the police officers involved basically exonerating themselves. And we see the public responding. We see from several different angles the killing actually happening. I found it to be a really, really impressive dropped-in moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it says at the end, like, you have this footage because of laws that were passed in Chicago that required them to release body cam footage of incidents like this. And when that happens, is so often just this info dump where it's like, okay, fine, we have this hours of video footage. Like, what is anyone going to do with it? But when someone takes the time to cobble it together this way and construct a narrative and make it really clear, and not with an agenda. I mean, the agenda is revealing, what happened here, but just saying, like, this is what happened. This is what the officers themselves said in this moment. It's so devastating and such like a a damning portrait of like a lot of bigger things than these officers themselves. This isn't about like one set of bad behavior, but like a lot of structural things. But it's just such a clarity of purpose. That's a New Yorker one. It's just like true journalism in this.
Yeah, and
I was blown away.
Through the filmmaking and the way that it's edited, through how there's like multicam approach throughout the film, it really does show the systemic problem as it happens in real time and how the public can respond in real time too. I thought it was really impressive.
Yeah, I was super impressed by that one. I mean, I also really loved Instruments of a Beating Heart that we brought up at the beginning. Who's backing that one? I can't remember. Does that have is that like a Netflix or New Yorker or something like that?
New York Times.
New York Times. It's just about Japanese school children in this way that you're like, is there a plot here? Is something going to happen? But it's like, no, these kids are going to play Ode to Joy. They're all first graders, so they're like 6 years old, and they're learning how to play this pretty complex percussion ensemble for kids of that age. And you like read an interview with the director is basically like, I think she went to Japanese public school. I think she now lives in America, and just wanted to like show what it's like to be a kid and to have that kind of pressure on you, but also how you can learn to succeed under that. And you've got this girl who's the main focus, and she wants to play the big bass drum so badly, and she doesn't get it, and she's so sad. And then she gets the cymbal, and her teacher is so hard on her. But then when her teachers say that they're proud of her at the end, it just like breaks your heart open. It's so I was like, I could not have cared more about how things turned out for these kids and their percussion instruments. It was so good.
And to my understanding, it's a piece of a larger film already too. But if this description of this sounds like it's a very cuddly type of big emotion movie, it is, but it isn't, because it also has this kind of Frederick Wiseman remove that it's like, well, this is the process of this thing. Like we can get emotionally involved as a viewer, but I think the movie is largely just concerned with the like in and outs of how this musical group in this elementary school or this grade school it functions and how it kind of comes together.
Yeah. I do think when you put it side by side with The Only Girl in the Orchestra, it reveals the limitations of that one a little bit, even though The Only Girl in the Orchestra is about an incredibly accomplished woman, Orrin O'Brien. She was the first female member of the New York Philharmonic. She plays the double bass, another huge instrument. Unexpected Leonard Bernstein cameo in this year's Oscar race. Maestro's back. Gonna get him again.
Maestro never left.
And it's made by her niece, who like grew up admiring her. And it's got this really interesting family history to it. Her parents were kind of like silent film actors, so there's a lot to it. But it's just such a more traditionally made look at someone who's accomplished a lot. And I like the way the Instruments of a Beating Heart gets at like that intensity and emotion, like just the way The Only Girl in the Orchestra is made, it can't do quite the same thing.
And it's backed by Netflix, so it has kind of a leg up there. This one I found to be a little scattered and might be better as a feature where you just have a little bit more time. But it does have that interesting prickliness of a somewhat reluctant subject who doesn't necessarily want to give you all the talking points that you might expect from someone in
she's like, don't call me an artist. I'm not an artist. It's like, girl, yeah, you are.
Yeah. And she, downplays being the first member of the New York Phil. And that's just more interesting and challenging, and it doesn't really have necessarily the space to do it in this short amount of time. Yeah. So it does feel like it's kind of cramming a lot in there. But it is entertaining too. It's kind of best when you just get to observe her rather than...
she's like teaching her students or something like that.
Yeah, or it's asking her to give some type of talking head response of like what it was like to be the first woman in the New York Philharmonic.
I look forward to her going to the Oscars. I'm going to look up her on Getty and see what she's wearing. I'm excited for her. The other one I noticed that had big names behind it is Death by Numbers, which is produced by the Kennedy Marshall Company and Frank Marshall. I guess Kathleen Kennedy's not listed as a producer, but is involved there. And it does have that kind of like flashiness, like it feels very assembled, and it's about like, really heavy subject matter. It's following someone who's testifying in the case with the Parkland shooter, and it kind of goes to a lot of effort to put the emphasis on her and her friends and other survivors more than the shooter himself, which I think is a very valuable purpose to serve. But it's also just kind of like glossy in a way that I thought kind of diminish some of its impact because it feels so much more about like the style more than the substance in some ways.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. It's also maybe a little familiar for like this type of documentary too. It's equal parts, the portrait of this survivor of Parkland and just the process of going through how the trauma of that is very real on a constant level because, you mentioned the testifying in court is ultimately like the big culminating moment of it.
And it's a weird double feature with I Am Ready, Warren, the fifth of them, because it's also about the criminal justice system and the death penalty, but it's basically the perspective of following a man in his last days on death row in Texas and the family of the man that he killed. And it's not really about anyone having forgiven him, but it's just kind of taking this guy as a human being and kind of asking the question of whether the death penalty is serving anybody in this scenario. And I found it had similar limitations, but also like just more compelling in the idea that like this is a justice system in which there's like no real, like no winners, no justice can actually be served here. So then you jump from that into death by numbers and you're like, wait a second, like let's get that nuance back, please.
Right. I do think that I Am Ready, Warden does kind of like embody the moral quandary that it's trying to like make us sit with and grapple with, especially in its final moments of, just trying to find some reconciliation in why do we do this? What do we actually gain by the death penalty in this country? And like, does it even serve the people that it's supposed to, honor, the remaining family members? And I think it, it felt instructive instructive to me and more like willing to sit in the discomfort of it. Yeah.
No, it's got this really stunning moment with the son of the guy who was murdered and, caused this whole case. Just learning the news that his father's killer is dead and sitting with that information and like not feeling the catharsis that he maybe hoped that he would, which is really moving. And so like it gets it really real feeling things like that. So it sounds like, is your favorite of this one Incident?
Yeah, Incident would be my pick here. I could see a lot of these being winners. I kind of think The Only Girl in the Orchestra being a Netflix movie has the upper hand there just in terms of campaign dollars.
Oh, I would give it to Death by Numbers. I think it's got a campaign behind it. It's got Frank Marshall. Anytime I get that like inside Hollywood edge from something like that, I mean, I might be wrong, but that would be my pick for that.
And if they get people to see it, then there you go. That's it right there.
Yeah. Okay, live action. Again, this is a category that can really run the gamut. I mean, truly, some years the worst Oscar nominee of any of them comes from the live action shorts. This is a pretty good group. Like, shorts overall did pretty well this year. Do you agree it's a higher batting average than we're used to?
Even the ones that kind of function a little bit like a hammer, thinking of recent years, there's less egregious, manipulative tactics in some of these. Yeah. And, some of these, the idea of us feeling like some of these can be a little obvious through Oscar history in terms of what their messaging is, what their tactics are in getting those messages across, these being in an Oscar race makes it a little bit more intentional. But these are movies that are just meant to like get the message out to people that, maybe we wouldn't be judging them so harshly or by different standards if they weren't Oscar nominees. So I also understand the method there.
The one of these that works like a hammer that I feel like I saw and said, oh, that's going to win is Alien.
Eileen?
Eileen. It's,
yes, the Eileen Du fake Celine Dion documentary. No. I don't know how to pronounce it. We'll just say Alien, I guess, or Alien. Sure. Yes, this also is one of those shorts that felt like, the audition for the feature as well. And it ends in the post. It's basically a family, mother, father, and child trying to go through the green card processing for the husband. And basically he gets detained through the process of, showing up for his scheduled interview and appointment. And the wife's, frantic search to be with him in these offices and she doesn't know what's going on, and they might also be taking their child as well.
Yeah. And this is like a real practice that they do is they show up at people's green card appointments, which is like
it ends with the postscript saying that, you know, this is a practice that is done to detain and deport people. And I think it even says how long it's been a standard practice. And like, this is the point of the movie, you know, of just getting that simple fact out there that's outrageous and appalling that we're doing in this country, and, you know, getting people to understand it, people who maybe didn't know, and can spread the good word about this simple thing that like we can understand, and we can understand why it's bad, you know?
Yeah. And also like there's, you know, talk to my neighborhood listeners about ICE raids happening like right now. Like it's so topical, which is what made me feel like anyone who was paying attention to this is like, it feels incredibly urgent the way this movie is made. And like, it's a hammer blow, but like the emotions got me. Like I thought it was emotionally effective. You know, not subtle, but neither are ICE raids. So I thought that one was pretty powerful. But I also think The Man Who Could Not Remain Silent in similar ways has like a real topical relevance. It's based on a true story from during the Bosnian War of like a pretty simple thing where like a train car is stopped and people are asked for their papers to see who's a Muslim and who's not. And there was this man who was, I guess he was Christian, but he kind of like went in the place of a young man who was being targeted and was never seen again. And what I liked about that movie is it focused, like he's part of the story, but it focuses for a while on this other guy who you think is going to step up and be the hero. And then when the moment comes, he can't say anything. And that feels really powerful because like, not to like go dramatic talking about the nominated live action shorts, but like we are all on this moment of being like, okay, when am I going to be the person who stands up? Like, when am I going to be the bystander who everyone asks afterwards, what you do? And I thought that movie got at that feeling of unease and like, what can you risk and what can't you really effectively.
Yeah, because that title is kind of like a red herring, you know. We think by nature of what we know going into it, what the title is, and we're given this protagonist. So our expectation is that this is the titular man who can't remain silent. But then we ultimately learn that it's a story about being the innocent bystander, perhaps being the person that history will not look kindly upon.
Yeah, being the good German.
And, you know, comparing it to Alien, which Alien is like all like harsh cuts shot in close-ups and such, and this is a very methodical almost like long takes style of filmmaking with, you know, the atrocity happening on the periphery, which makes you think of a lot of other things that Oscar has recognized for feature films like Son of Saul, Zone of Interest, other different type of Euro cinema, though this is actually the first Croatian Oscar nomination. So hooray for Croatia.
Cool. Sorry, I said Bosnia. I should say Croatia.
It takes place in Bosnia, but I believe it's a Croatian film.
My former Yugoslavian lack of knowledge shows again.
I really, really responded to this one. I thought it was the best of the lineup.
I think it probably is too.
Yeah.
Anuja is one that I noticed that has a big name behind it. Mindy Kaling is an executive producer. I guess she's a producer because I think she is an Oscar nominee for this movie. It's made with real kids in New Delhi who work on the streets or work in sweatshops. And I liked it. Like, I'm not sure like the story really gets you a lot of places by the time you get to the end of it. It kind of ends with footage of like the real kids it's inspired by watching the movie, which I thought was very charming. And
it also made me think, oh, this could win because it ends with the footage of the real kids that it's depicting.
Yeah. Yep. The Last Ranger has like a similar kind of like, here's a movie about a big idea. Like, I think I said to you earlier, like so many of the shorts are like, all right, imagine the worst thing that exists and we're going to make a movie about it. And
this one's about rhino poaching.
Yeah. And like, really bloody. Like there was way more blood involved in this than I thought there would be.
It looks beautiful. It has a big scope. So it's like the one, if this wins, it probably is a response to that, that it looks like an expensive feature-length movie.
Yeah. And then I liked I Am Not a Robot, which like is such a funny concept of like getting caught in a CAPTCHA saying you're not a robot and then being directed to a link that says maybe you are a robot. I don't know if it knows where to go with that. Like when it feels like it's picking up speed, you're like, oh, okay. But I was taken by the idea they put into it.
They do a good job in terms of the filmmaking. It does feel a little sketchy, like it's a Funny or Die sketch a little bit. It also is bookended by the child's chorus doing Radiohead's Creep. I think we maybe need to find another song other than Radiohead's Creep at this point in time for the culture. But
so, yeah, I think I agree with you that The Man Who Could Not Remain Silent is the strongest of these. I still think Alien is going to win, and I would be okay with that winning here. And like, again, there's just not a movie like Skin in here where I'm just like, oh God, come on, you guys, we cannot do this. It's a sorry to Skin. It never feels good to like have your Oscar villain be a short that like nobody has seen.
Yes.
It's like, but if you guys just understood, you would know that this is a bad movie that can't win. Well, Chris, I think we both recommend to everyone to watch the shorts if you can. Like, it is a pleasure. It gives you such a glimpse into other kinds of filmmaking. Again, it's like novelty at this point in the Oscar race. Yeah, should people just go find in their local theaters, and will it help them in their Oscar pool? Do you think this helps you get it right at all?
Hey, hopefully we've helped you in your Oscar pool. You know, wins at Oscar parties, Oscar pools in your office, they can live or die by how well you guess the shorts.
Yeah, and people should go to the Ankler and go look at my latest newsletters under Prestige Junkie to figure out how to join the Ankler Oscar pool. We'll put a link in the show notes for this podcast as well. And Chris, I hope you'll be there. I know you've got multiple Oscar pools going on, but this one has
there.
All of these beautiful listeners in there. So yeah, beat Chris Feil, get the bragging rights, and we'll see you in our Oscar pool. For many people, their first encounter with my guest, Monica Barbaro, was probably in Top Gun Maverick. It was this 2022 box office sensation. She was the only woman in this crowd of young and tough Top Gun pilots working with Tom Cruise. But like so many stars before her, Barbaro spent about a decade becoming an overnight sensation. She grew up in the Bay Area. She trained as a dancer. And then when she transitioned to acting, she spent a lot of time taking classes and really building her craft as an actor, which she tells me sustained her as she went through the grueling process of auditioning over and over again. But she also said that process really gave her good training for the current whirlwind of award season that she's in. She's nominated for Best Supporting Actress for playing Joan Baez in A Complete Unknown, and she is once again a big overnight sensation. It's easier to do all this press, she tells me, when it's a movie that everybody loves. I also talked to her about the COVID period where she and her castmates had seen Top Gun Maverick and thought it might change their lives, but no one else had seen it yet. And then also why she's still trying to avoid having to sing karaoke, even though the whole world now knows that she is a really great singer. You can hear it all in my conversation with Oscar nominee, the star of A Complete Unknown, Monica Barbaro. So, Monica, before we started, I was telling you how I'm recovering from losing my voice and trying to sound okay. And then I figured that you, as someone who has learned how to sing very recently, are you taking care of your voice better than you were before you played Joan Baez? Have you learned anything that I can use, maybe?
God, no, I'm not at all. I should be, and I'm not. In fact, Eric Vitro, my lovely vocal coach, who also coaches Ariana Grande generally and for Wicked, was like, I hope you're making sure to keep taking care of your voice. And I think I left him on red. I was like, oh, I can't admit to him that I don't do that. As I'm literally drinking things not to do, drink coffee and sparkling water.
Oh, no, I love sparkling water.
Those are no-nos. Honestly, though, I think your voice sounds great.
Oh, thank you.
I love a hoarse voice.
Thank you very much.
It's very, as you said, Demi Moore.
Well, when you were filming A Complete Unknown, did you have to really be in the temple? Your voice is a temple, your body is a temple space to do what you did in that film?
I did, yes. At the time, while doing the movie, I was very committed to it. I wasn't drinking alcohol. Although I don't do that as much anymore anyway, but I was really careful about with a lot of throat coat tea, honey. But it was hard because we'd be in these rooms full of smoke, and It wasn't cigarette smoke, but it was still hard on the lungs and the eyes. I would wake up the next day and just have these puffy eyes and a sore throat. And it's funny because I remember I talked about it with Timmy at one point because he was like, oh, it's helping me get the Bob sound. He's like, but yeah, when he had done Wonka, he was like, yeah, you have to, have as smooth of a voice as possible.
Yeah.
So it's challenging for
Although
sure.
my impression of these people in the 60s is that no one was doing any of that for their voices then. Like the self-care was not on the level of what we know now of how to take care of your voice.
Yeah. Well, and Joan wasn't a sort of classically trained singer in any way. I mean, I guess she had done a bit of it like when she was really young, but mostly she was just kind of on her own. I think she must have warmed up her voice and stuff, but also she just had super strong pipes, and I don't think she was super precious about it. So I wasn't in my process either,
Okay.
Not overly so, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I know that you trained as a dancer, not as a singer, that like singing was not really part of your identity as a performer. What was your relationship to singing like for fun or anything else before you took this on?
I love singing at home in private, love it. But yeah, sharing that with others is terrifying to me. I'm not a fan of karaoke. I was thrown into a situation recently where karaoke was forced upon me. And I literally, it's like recently, in a way that I thought I had gotten over this, but I was literally on stage and I just refused to sing. I was like, no,
And it's everyone you know now, like, dude, we know you can't sing. You can't punk out on us.
Yeah, I don't know how many people there knew. It's kind of a long story. I don't know how many people there knew the context of. If they found out, I think the two behaviors, me having been in this movie and then me completely hiding in that situation, would be really incongruent. They'd be like, this is not the same person. Yeah, I was very uncomfortable singing in front of people. Like, if I'm singing in front of you, that means we're friends.
I do imagine your friends now feeling like there's a whole side of you that, not that they would force you to do karaoke, they probably love you more, but they're probably like, all right, we know the secret now.
Yeah, I mean, literally, one of my friends was like, bitch, you can sing? I was like, I don't know.
Well, I was thinking of the dancing training because, like, I think when you learn an art like that, when you're pretty young, it sticks with you. Like, it becomes part of your bones in a way that you, like, will have forever. And I'm curious about how that dance training is with you now as you're pursuing other roles. And acting is really physical. Singing is really physical. It's about posture. So, like, do you look back and think, like, oh, I still have these dancer practices or mannerisms, even if it's not what you're doing actively right now?
Oh, for sure. And I think that's actually the interesting thing about getting into a character. Like, the things I would show someone portraying a dancer that I do are so specific. Like, I still pop my hips a certain way and my feet and like just stretch a certain way. And I mean, it's very much a part of me for life, even if the skills, even if my like joints sort of atrophy. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a part of me. And I'm looking for projects right now. Actually, it's kind of amazing. I have a few that I'm looking at just in the course of this whole press conversation. It's gone from like, I'd love to now like, I'm considering projects, which is fun. The projects that have dance as a component in them. Great. Yeah, because that's a dream for me, especially, before my joints, fully give up on me.
Yeah, I was thinking about making that transition from dancing to acting because they're both expressive, they're both performing, but no one ever sits and asks a dancer, like, so who was your inspiration in taking on this role? Or like, what did you really want to get out? Like, the way that actors are expected to talk about their work or maybe even approach the work is really different from dance. Like, what was that adjustment like for you of not just like doing the work, but learning how to think of it and express it and sell yourself in audition and all these things that is so different for someone who's a dancer?
God, I mean, well, I think for one, dancing just doesn't have nearly the level of attention that, acting, film, TV does. And I think that's a bummer, honestly.
Yeah.
So there's that. But I do think of like what we're doing right now as so different from, selling oneself in sort of the audition process in a way.
Yeah.
Luckily, with an audition, you're still, I mean, at its best, you're still just absorbing a character. It's just for like such a quick beat and it's not quite, you want to prepare a lot, but it's not the depth of the character development to the degree that it is for when you book the job.
Yeah.
But yeah, this has been an interesting process, learning how to talk about it. And everyone's obviously really different. It's funny, like Ed Norton is like, let's not talk about process. And like sometimes I think it's fun too. And I don't know, it's hard. It kind of like put me in therapy because I just really, a part of why I love acting is getting to embody someone else and getting to lean on the words on the page, you know? And I like writing, but I don't share my writing really. And to speak on the fly as myself and know that it's going to like, you know, that one sentence is going to become a headline potentially and run away from me, or to be misquoted or to be like, it just, the attention in the photos and the, like, I find it all extremely, like at its worst, I have found it all very stress inducing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I have the best team. I eventually started working with like the best. Matt, my publicist, is somewhere listening. And like I sought therapy and just have now done it enough. And I will say it's a lot easier to do when you have a project that people really like. And so it just becomes, it's become a little bit easier, and I've sort of detached a little bit from the outcome of everything I do. I don't read a lot of articles or listen back to podcasts.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's crazy. Some people are really comfortable with it. And
it's an adjustment for everybody, I think.
Yeah. It's so different from the work that we do.
Yeah.
You know, like you have to sort of sometimes think of it as playing a character. And then I go sort of like, well, what character do I want to present as? And you kind of also just like slide in from one interview to the next in a totally different energy space. Like one will be pizzazzy and they want you to make jokes and like, you know, and then the next thing you know, they'll be like, so your process is Joan. And you're like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, is that not something you learn a little bit? Because like the way your career worked, where you presumably were just auditioning and you're trying to stand out and you're walking from one room to another and being like, who do these people want me to be? Does that process teach you something about this? Even though now you have to be yourself, it's not quite getting into character, but it is a like, you know, making yourself fit into a space. And then now maybe you get to create the own space for yourself a little bit. But what did that process of auditioning and building your career teach you?
Well, the best thing I learned about auditioning was that my job was to go in the room and serve the story and serve the writing and the character and create a scene. It was not selling myself. It's not going in and performing so much. It's literally like, because I was always in acting class when I wasn't working. And the enjoyment I had in developing characters and being in acting class and the freedom that I felt eventually, like in doing scenes with people, I realized that is what I needed to bring to the audition room. That like, no, you don't have quite the same amount of time to like develop your relationship with the space, but you can sort of in your imagination. And if you've built up a world around yourself that is flexible, able to change if they tell you, you know, because they can throw a curveball and tell you something, the scene is completely different. But if you've built that for yourself and you walk in, like you get to do a scene with a brand new person at a new time and space, and then you walk away and maybe that thing just completely disappears, never, you know, never to exist again. And maybe it's not your part and whatever, but you get this one little slice of a chance to play in the room. And the more present I was about that, the less it felt like I needed to steer towards something the casting director wanted or steer toward, you know, like I could just sort of embrace the story and the writing and the character in the moment. So
and that's
helped.
What that acting class, it sounds like that's what's feeding you artistically. Like when, you know, you go to auditions, they work, or maybe you get like a part that's one line. Like I think some people tend to get dragged down by that kind of thing, but it sounds like you were really building yourself and getting like artistic fulfillment throughout that whole time.
God, I mean, it's also horrible. like you also drive home like, I hate myself. But the classes helped. I actually realized this during COVID. I was like many people cleaning out closets I hadn't looked at in a while. And I realized I'd kept so many costume elements that I had used for acting classes. And I was just sort of acknowledging how much those meant to me and how much the periods of time in my life that I have been able to dive into acting class, how much I valued that, because I think it was my anchor in the midst of a lot of really shallow auditions and a lot of feeling like I needed to sell myself, to be a version of myself that I didn't want to be. And just that constant fluctuation and lack of stability is hard. So to have a place where I could be creative and really like commit to a character and bring it back a couple of times and get notes and collaborate, like that was, I was so lucky to have that on top of, what it does for you as an actor in terms of getting better.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that time during COVID, because you shoot Maverick entirely before the pandemic starts, I think. And then there's this long period where A, you don't know how the movie's going to turn out, and B, like the world is shut down. You have a lot of time to think. Like, do you remember what that period was like for you, being like, well, maybe this will boost my career or maybe it won't? And do you just proceed as normal, or do you have this sense of something looming over you in the future?
We saw the movie in September of 2020.
Okay.
And
so you knew it was good relatively early.
Yeah, really great and like really special, and that we needed to wait, as like it needed to be released for theaters. At the same time, I mean, we actually I think bonded maybe the most as a cast during that time. We definitely bonded while making the movie, but there was like something else that set in, because we had this collective understanding that this movie was going to be, you never know really, but like that it really was something wonderful, and it was going to help us in our careers. And everyone felt that way, no matter how successful they were prior. And to get to like talk to each other about that every time that it pushed, and just understand like, we felt impatient, of course, but we were also like supporting each other, and like we would take turns. One day someone would be like, I wish they would just release it, and then everyone else would be like, no, it needs to come out in theaters. And like we would take turns being that person. Yeah. And to trust that and to be patient is very difficult. I had also auditioned to play Joan in A Complete Unknown, like right before the shutdown.
I didn't realize it. I knew that. Yeah, I didn't realize it went back that far.
Yeah. Well, and then I didn't book it until 2023. Yeah. So that was another thing that was like, oh, so close. Like I was supposed to meet James Mangold, and then it was like, oh, there's this pandemic thing, like maybe in a month or something. I was like, okay. And then
so in your head, you have to be like, that might not ever happen. Like, why would you assume it'll pick it back up when a pandemic's over?
Yeah. I had a constant thing where I was like, maybe I should learn her songs. Nope, don't do it. Maybe I should learn guitar. Nope, don't attach to it. And then I was also lucky that so Skydance is one of the producers of Top Gun, and they had seen the movie, and I was then offered a show because they had seen it. So it was like the kind of thing where like internally the only people allowed to see it knew that I had something to offer, and then offered me my show Fubar. Yeah. So there were things in the works that, I lucked out to have along the way. But yeah, it was a lot of quiet waiting.
I love that you screenshotted the email that James Mangold sent you to give you the role and put it on Instagram. Like, it was just such a sweet email and a thing to hang on to. Like, what was that moment like of like getting to the end of that process and getting a very nice Gmail from James Mangold telling him that you had it?
Oh my God. Well, I had thought about it for years. Yeah. And I walked away from meeting him genuinely just so grateful that I had ever in my life had the opportunity to sit across from James Mangold and talk about films and about filmmaking with some level of my own experience to bring to the table. Like, God, that was cool. But I wanted it so badly. Like, I really, really wanted to do this job. And at that point, I cared and care so much for Joan. And that was hard. It's always just a little bit of torture. It's like, of course, you want to be passionate about a job. You want to do the job. But that feeling, that like desire tips into desperation so quickly. Yeah. No, I had literally that morning been trying to learn a song because I was like, I remember thinking, I've realized something about myself in this process. I do think I want to do a project with music. I want to do something with singing. Like, I think that is something I do want to do. And I had gotten a keyboard during the pandemic. And so I was playing it and like crying. And I told my manager on the phone, I was like, I was literally playing the piano this morning and like crying over the keys. And then my manager, like, I think was just so thrown off. He was like, well, now you can play the piano happy. I was like, okay, I'll keep more of this to myself next time.
I love that you say that when you and James Mangold first met, you talked about films and in general, because like obviously there's a lot of references for you in terms of this character, but did he give you guys movies? Was there like cinematic references that helped you get into this film?
Well, he gave, in that meeting that we had, he talked about Amadeus. He talked about how this film was similar in that it's not, in the Amadeus context, it's not Mozart telling you who he is or what happened to him in his childhood that, took him on this journey. It's not cradle to grave. It's a story about a person based on the reflections of the people around that person. And I was like, oh my God, that's so interesting. Rewatched Amadeus immediately. And I hadn't even really watched Amadeus with that perspective before.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really cool. And then as I saw it coming together, knowing the way Jim is about his work and about how many different sort of genres he's gotten to play in, I just felt like it was so cool because I think like a director's vision and like I feel like a director's background and whatever their childhood, their whatever, their inner workings like are always apparent in their filmmaking. And I just feel like this is such a perfect one for him to be so celebrated for because it's about an artist's evolution and not being put in a box. And I think Jim is that director. He pivots a lot and then talks about how like at the heart of it, it's just about storytelling in a scene with two actors. And I just find him really fascinating.
I love that Amadeus reference because there's a version of this movie where you get Pete Seeger and Joan could be the Salieri and could be bitter and watching this person succeed. And that last scene with Joan after the party, I feel like is so essential to him being able to move on from her without the movie being like, well, goodbye, like leave her with her folkies. And I don't know if you could talk about that scene specifically, about how you guys talked about, how you and Timmy talked about it, just to get her tone of like peaceful acceptance that she's going to go her way and he's going to go his, and neither of them is the better path. It's just kind of exactly how it should be. How did you guys approach that one?
It's funny. We didn't really like sit and talk. We didn't talk about a lot of these scenes. We didn't really like theorize before we got into it. For me with Joan, at that point, she was grappling with her relationship with her own fame. It wasn't really a comfortable thing for her. I think she wanted to do things that she felt were of like greater value. I think being famous didn't really align with her values in a lot of ways, like some of the superficiality that comes with it. I relate. And she was like leaning a lot more towards her activism. And she went and started a school, for pacifism. And, for me with her, she was like moving on in her own way and, not necessarily leaving folk behind, not at all, but she was moving into a time in her life when she called herself like a musician third or something. Like she was like, first, I am an activist.
Yeah.
But there's also, I think, something so interesting about her that she wasn't like, in spite of all of their drama together, and you see this a bit in the It Ain't Me Babe song scene, in spite of all of that, they continued to perform together throughout the years. So she put a lot of their issues behind her a lot of the time, and they were still able to collaborate in spite of their intense history. And you don't see that a lot in the world. So there was that. And Jim always saw her as a very autonomous individual. And I really appreciated that about his perspective. He always had her with a guitar in order to show that, even though a lot of times when you watch concert footage, Joan doesn't have a guitar when Bob does. But he wanted, in every chance he got, to show her as this, autonomous, standalone, solo performing, individual, strong woman. And the guitar helped do that visually for him.
Yeah.
And I agree with that choice. At the time, I didn't. I was like, it's not authentic to what really happened.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And now I see, I'm like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I will say also, we shot that scene like in a few different ways. Like the beauty of filmmaking is we didn't have to decide on the day what the final beat felt like exactly or how exactly she felt about it. We could play. And so I think we tried a couple different things, or I walked into it, you know, maybe more resolute, and he was sort of like giving me ideas that were like maybe more vulnerable with her. And so you play and you get to kind of decide that later as you see the whole picture.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, I think you said in another interview that you have a ton of unread messages on your phone, which is, I have talked to other Oscar nominees at exactly this point who are in the same position. Like,
So
are you
bad.
is it just going to stay that way till March 3rd and then you can resume your life?
I think probably, yeah, I'm currently at 8:50.
Oh, no. They can probably find you somewhere and be like, oh, she's busy. I think I can see her on, whatever event this is. We'll get in touch at some point in the future.
Yeah, I mean, and I was like, so I just felt so grateful the day it happened too. I really was like, I'm going to respond to everybody.
Yeah.
And I still dream of that because it's literally every single person I've ever interacted with that has like gotten me to this point, but it's intense. It's a lot. It's a lot of just sitting and like furrowing your brow and texting, and that you just kind of also need to like breathe.
Yeah. You got to ride this wave for a few more weeks, and then I think you'll have the time. That does it for today's episode. This podcast is edited by Brett Fuchs and produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-host, Chris Feil. Subscribe to the Prestige Junkie newsletter at theankler.com and subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to sign up to join us in our Oscar pool. There's a link in our show notes. And if you go to my latest newsletter, you can find it there as well. We'll be back on Tuesday. See you then.